Today I will present some of the works, like the art-based practice of my doings and engagement of the last couple of years that is pretty much involved with the public space and the happenings or the disintegration of the industry in Croatia. Some projects started actually in collaboration with the curatorial group Block, which is also presenting after me, that opened actually for me ongoing debate that is in Croatia very present about the public space being very much consumerized, and the ways these processes are led and the ways also artistic practices can be involved in them in order to try to create more autonomy or more independent way of thinking and occupying and having actually public space. I will focus in my talk today about the work Eye to Eye with Freedom. That is the work which is present in the exhibition. You can see documentation of photographs. It was a performance in public space in Rijeka, and this is just an image that I collected from an archive, and I found it today very interesting to actually hear about from some artists about these boxes and piles of cardboard boxes that one digs into, and how hard it is actually to collect images in order to learn about certain practices or the ways artists conceived artworks, especially now for public space, in the past, and how one can learn. And actually I base my practice a lot on this, not only on archival research, but also research that is very field-oriented and communication with people oriented, especially when talking about the disintegration in industry, where I actually worked on a project in Rijeka before this Eye to Eye with Freedom that I find interesting and important to mention today, because it somehow started this whole idea for me in my work connected to Rijeka, that still somehow from the Croatian cities preserves this its social realist historical inheritance very well, and it's still quite proud of it in comparison to some other cities that also have a practice of removing these monuments. This is an image of Vinko Matkovic, Croatian local Rijeka sculptor that was very active in the 50s, 60s, and has created many monuments of social realism around Rijeka, based representing workers, rebellions, and it's also actually for me a very interesting photo because it shows construction of monument, a bone structure. I see it before any kind of actual meaning is applied to it, and I found this aspect, actually this photo, as an interesting way for me to enter into thinking about this implementation of power, ideas and meaning today for myself as an artist, also who deals with the history from one hand, but also rethinks it in a way of what could this historical presentation mean for me as an artist, and what do I want to represent when I work with that further. So I always came back to this image of this male. It's also important to say that I also look at the gender representation it's very important somehow interest for me in also my ongoing work. So it's this male artists presenting men and women, as you've seen in the exhibition, partisans who were liberating Rijeka from Italian fascism. But talking about this project, I actually have to start with the work before that kind of led me thinking more about actually the representation of body, the representation of body within past ideologies, and the power inscribed in it. This is a sculpture standing in front of the shipyard of the 3rd of May in Rijeka. That is actually an example of one still existing industry, which was for me interesting as a second step of my project starting in Zagreb with a kind of economically destroyed industry of textile industry. This was the next step of looking at a still working machine, but machine that since decades already is really in disintegration, as you know that shipyard industry it's moving a lot to other cheaper labor countries. The monument is larger than life, 4.5 meters sculpture out of bronze, casted inside of the shipyard in '65, which was, of all the research that I did, which was a field research, which was conversations with the workers and the people engaged in the archiving and teaching processes within the shipyard, teaching new methods to young people. Was actually, this monument was more important on the end as to work with, for me, to construct my work around as an artist, than to work actually with representing this quite sad document of personal exchanges, which were at the end very precious, and I did not feel the need to actually summon them in an artwork in order to tell this story that is pretty known to all of us who follow the workers' position within these post-communist countries today. Within the research in the archives of the magazine that was published in the shipyard 3rd of May every couple of months from the 60s till the 90s, I found these interesting images of caricatures that I guess the editors of the magazine used besides texts that were dealing actually with current issues and problems and politics of running the work within the shipyard. And I found the image on the right side that kind of directly refers to the monument that I just spoke about, and on the other, underneath, shows actually the workers self-representing themselves as actually the body is not as strong, the body is not the high, it's not the ideal worker, but the worker is carrying it by being bended above his head. And one photograph, which was also important for this project for me, was this beautiful photo of the actually sculpture within the artist studio in the '65, which I found as an interesting reference for me, because I found myself researching about this kind of changes that are happening in the space of the shipyard and how the whole area is kind of getting affected by this disintegration of labor. I found myself a little bit also very much confronted with the question of what my role there is or could be, and how actually art, as an artist, you can deal with these issues of representing these kind of changes. So I will not show now the whole project, because that's the outcome was an exhibition. But one part of this, which I guess is very interesting to this exhibition, is my intervention into the photograph. I decided to, on the end, appropriate this image and to erase product of labor from the worker's hand, which also kind of renders the body broken. The image is called "What a Body Can Do." In an exhibition setting, it is placed somehow in a relation to a podest with a just small screw that was found on one of the walks within the shipyard, and then was put in the pocket, my pocket, which after certain time being forgotten in that pocket and being taken out of the pocket, it was one part became golden, and this was like one exhibit of this show of kind of trying to critically also approach or like reflect to the idea of artistic involvement or like representation of issues like workers or like worker disintegrated labor issues today. Working with the sculpture of Matkovic made me also look much more closely the other sculptures within public space of Rijeka. But social realist sculptures, it's not something that is really always necessarily very relevant in my work. I'm dealing with construction of power within public space in general, and especially the way of gender relations that are constructed, how gender is constructed through these representations. As I found it very interesting that Miško Šuvaković in the morning referred a lot to this construction of power also through gender, and also, I mean, the painting that we see here, I wonder also what the woman who participated in this, which we see in the middle as one of the main characters, what actually happens after the riot is over, because then the feminist movement started, and there was a specific reason why actually these women were represented in the middle of the painting, but their actual struggle started afterwards. Maybe that was the point of this visibility that I dealt or deal currently or in some past projects. As you have maybe seen in the exhibition, the Eye to Eye with Freedom is focused on the sculpture which is in the center of Rijeka. It's as you see, it's a high pillar. It's 20 meters high. It's the highest monument in Rijeka, and it's shaped in the letter T, as Tito's initials, which I didn't ever recognize until I did not read it about. I just always saw it as a pillar with a little platform on top of which there is a monument of 3 partisans. And my action was to organize, in collaboration with, actually in production of the Museum of Contemporary Art and Spajalica, projects in public space in 2014, an action that would enable the citizens of the city to kind of stand eye to eye with a central female partisan. And what I found, it worked very well because as a very simple strategy of just working with perspective, changing the perspective of a monument that was always meant to be seen from low or from the streets and being looked upon, which dimensions are which is over-dimensionalized, which hands and face expressions are made much larger. in order to be visible from beneath. I found this strategy of just simple changing of perspective a very interesting way of also as a like translation in how we can read history, of how we can today actually face through this little change of perspective, how we can actually create a completely new perspective or a new meaning of a monument, or what it can actually represent today, and what these ideas that are implemented within it, what do they actually mean today to us? Because these monuments are somehow today almost invisible, although they are in the center of a city. They have so much become part of something known and daily that one does not really pay attention. So the action offered 2 days for 3 hours each day. That was the maximum of time we could actually get with our limited kind of budget, and with the amazing help of the firemen who volunteered with the promise that if there's a fire they would have to and it was actually amazing that there was people who actually employed in the city work, because they took care. They really took care. Any kind of other I assume that hiring a very expensive company who could do this thing, they will come and do their job, which often is the case, and they took care, and they are used to talk with people, and they used to help people. So this is a small crowd now. There were 2 days, and there was much more interest that I ever imagined there would be for this project, especially the second day when people heard about it. And somebody asked me yesterday, how did you dare to do that? Didn't you think that there would be like negative responses, because especially from the older people, as this monument does represent something that in other parts of Croatia it's removed, a history which we do not want to acknowledge. And I actually never had this idea that this would be something. I never thought of this being seen as something negative, maybe because I come from Rijeka, that specifically has a different climate, political climate, than in different other parts of Croatia, maybe. Or also that it's very much proud of its partisan involvement and anti-fascist movement. So actually the responses were overwhelming for me. People were overwhelmed. I was overwhelmed by the responses, but of course also some critical thoughts came out of that, because of especially what Maja Čirić also now referred to, the nostalgia without criticism. I think there is a danger. So there is a danger in continuing with this kind of practice without stepping back and being reflective about it. And it's also a danger of becoming too entertaining in this especially project. But that's something. That's a practice one does as an experiment also, and as a method of learning. There are some of the and the fist. The mayor of Rijeka, for example, came the second day. So that's the attitude, that's the kind of political attitude in Rijeka towards its history, which I find respectful and nice. This is a woman who was the flower girl, for example, who was, people came with all kinds of stories. She was the flower girl in the day of the opening in '65 of this monument, and brought me images of her as a 7-year-old girl with these flower constructions in front of the monument. So again, I have this image here, as I found it extremely inspiring for some other steps that I did with this whole experience and knowledge. And I found it also interesting to read, like just on the side, a statement of the Vinko Matkovic, the artist, who completely for him, modern art did not exist. So asking him, that was not art. So he was completely dedicated to the idea of didactic representation of narrative. So art, if it wants to get close to wider audiences, it has to be understandable. For the other higher audience, art can be also new and modern, and it can evoke polemics and discussions. It is funny that, after all, art audiences are still divided to wider one and narrow one. Abstract art today is only reserved for that higher audience, because obviously only that one is called upon to solve artistic problems. Art is a higher goal. It should have a human and conscious impact on all people. Art is not a forum for exposing personal opinions. After all, my opinion is that the wide circles of people should be acquainted with the work of sculptors by setting up big and quality shows on which critics will objectively explain the artworks. So I guess Vinko would not be very happy that I am using, for example, this image as an important reference, as seeing it as a very constructivistic, very constructivistic idea before the work, to actually using this image to create more meaning. And I find it interesting to show you some of the other work in process of his, posing in front of different stages. What I found, what was for me, of course, important with this project, Eye to Eye with Freedom, was the image, the construction of, as I said, the gender, and as in his text and some writings and explanation, it came obvious that the two men who are on the left and the right side, the woman is the central part, the woman is the central figure. The two men have military, like army boots and Kalashnikovs, while the woman has kind of peasant shoes and raised arms. And in his text, he obviously kind of clears it out that she's the allegory. She's the allegory of freedom. So that was the idea also, to kind of bring people up to look at this eye to this also female representation, the central figure, the allegory of something that today, of liberation, which today we still don't know what would it mean, liberation. Of different other forms of fascism we are confronted with. The other small series of works that I create as a small personal exercise, it's actually a personal artistic exercise, but it's also an actual exercise where I kind of collage different, or juxtapose different images from my own body and my own work within my own studio or place where I work with these images of constructing this female allegoric character, which was part of an exhibition that in Rovinsko Selo in Istria last summer, where actually I had a opportunity to reconstruct the bone structure, which I will show you. And the idea was to create, to make some kind of a sculpture exercise of simplified version of the bone structure that actually through it was a collaboration with Philip Leitner, sound and computer programmer and sound artist, with whom we recreated the bone structure in a simplified version by also putting amplifiers that made vibrations within the sculptures, the object, and one could actually grab the pipes, and by these vibrations of grabbing and touching, it produced noises within it, so one could actually lean his ear and listen to it. Thank you.